Good evening, everyone. It being 7:01 and a quorum present, I'm going to call this October 9, 2024 meeting of the Plymouth Planning Board to order. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency and signed into law on March 29, 2023, this meeting is being conducted via remote and in-person participation. Information regarding participation remotely can be found at the town's website. First on our agenda are our administrative notes. We have no minutes this evening, and we have no covenants, plans, and releases, so I'll go straight to Form A plans. We have A 4886, 296 Center Hill Road, LLC, and Karen and Joshua Jordan. Lot line adjustment, map 052, lot 021-065B and 066A. Any questions, comments from the board? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to endorse.
We have a motion to endorse. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none and everyone present, by show of hands, all in favor? It is unanimous. Next on our agenda are our announcements. I'll start with the announcement to remind people that town meeting is Saturday, October the 9th, being held at Plymouth North High School and broadcast on the local scene, which is formerly known as PAC TV. Oh, I'm sorry, October 19th, thank you. I'm rushing ahead. Planning board articles being considered at this fall town meeting are the land bank and an amendment to the village open space bylaw, which would allow it to apply to the waterfront district. Those seeking more information regarding the various articles should contact the planning department, who'll be happy to give you information. Next, I want to report that the Cedarville Steering Committee is putting out a community survey seeking input on traffic and community amenities in Cedarville. They are looking for public input, so you can find the link to that on the town website. We hope that those people who are living in and finding their way through Cedarville will participate. Next, we have some information regarding the master plan. The next Master Plan Community Forum will be held on October the 24th at 6 p.m. at Plymouth South Middle School. This forum is going to be focused on economic development and public services. Following that forum, we have two more that have already been scheduled. We have Wednesday, November 20th, which is future land use, housing, and transportation, and December 5th, sustainability, resiliency, and natural resources. Also, again, adding open space and recreation, which we've already had one forum on, but it is very important, so we're going to do a second one. So again, all of those are going to be at Plymouth South Middle School starting at 6 p.m. Everyone is welcome and encouraged to attend. Are there any further announcements from members of the board? Seeing none, we're going to move to our first item, which is an informational presentation regarding the Clark Road traffic improvements. Just to remind the community that this is an informational presentation only. This relates to improvements that have been approved by the state and the town. The board has nothing to vote on, nothing to say about it, but we did want to make sure that we as a board knew what was going to happen when something we're going to consider, obviously, in any future plans for the area. And of course, we want the community to have information as to what's going to happen there. So there's no public comment on this because there's really, unfortunately, nothing more that we can say other than thanking the state and the town and the Pine Hills for working to get this moving forward. So, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Deb Sedaris from the Pine Hills, board members, and also Jeff Dirk from Vanessa Associates is participating in this presentation remotely. Jeff is here, and I think I'm actually going to let Jeff commence the presentation, and I will just drive the slides.
That sounds good, and thank you for the introduction, Deb. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Deb, I can't see the presentation, you're pulling it up, so I'll kind of let you kind of
Okay.
me along.
So we're,
Oh, there it is, I can see it.
you got it?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Jeffrey Dirk with Vanessa and Associates, assisting Deb with the presentation. Just by way of background, and the chair may remember, we appeared before the board at an early stage of undertaking the concept plans, or essentially developing the concept plans for improvements that we're going to show to you tonight. And we did, I mean, despite the fact, as you said, Mr. Chairman, that we're not here to get a vote from the board, there were very good comments from the board. And I think what you'll see is, in terms of what we've worked with the town of Mass DOT on, a lot of the comments and discussion that we had at the initial introductory presentation on this have been incorporated into the design plans. And like usual, as we always hope, it's resulted in a better design. So we'll go through each of the improvements with you. As you might recall, we did undertake a transportation analysis looking at various improvements at Pine Hills Drive, Meeting Way, and Landmark Drive, and whether signals would be needed or alternative improvements at those locations. And as we talked about this specific improvements, as you know, we've phased the improvements. So tonight we're going to talk to you about phase one, which is the initial piece of the improvements along Clark Road that we've been working with the town of Mass DOT on. So we want to give you an update in terms of where we are with regards to that design, give you the time frame, and then start to talk about the phase two improvements, which were going to come online shortly after the phase one improvements on purpose, because I think as we talked about, the idea is to have a seamless corridor improvement that would stretch from and include Pine Hills Drive, and then progressing easterly to include the Landmark Drive intersection as well, which is where the pedestrian crossing currently exists. So Deb, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So just by way of kind of a reintroduction to the phase one improvements, as I mentioned, what you see on the slide here is the phase one improvements entail the Pine Hills Drive intersection and the Meeting Way intersection. One of the reasons why both of those intersections are included in the phase one is they're relatively close to each other. So as we look at the concept plan, as we had talked about initially, we do have left turn lanes being installed. And because of the proximity to those two intersections, it just makes sense to provide the turn lanes at both of the intersections. Also introducing traffic calming measures, which you'll see in the next slide as well. So that's the phase one work that's being undertaken. As we had mentioned, the Pine Hills Drive intersection meets the warrants for a traffic signal, so that's what's going to be installed at that location. That was also the preferred alternative because of the fact that we have the fire station off of Pine Hills Drive and the need, and I think the fire chief expressed it very well, to be able to have them safely be able to get the emergency vehicles in and out of that fire station in the event of an emergency. And then lastly, as I mentioned, at the Meeting Way intersection, we do have some geometric improvements which include traffic calming by way of some raised islands. You can go to the next slide, Deb, because I think we've kind of described some of the work that's taking place. So this is now the phase one plan. So it has undergone, as Deb had mentioned, a review by both the town and the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, because the section of Clark Road that's proximate to the interchange is under Mass DOT jurisdiction. So they wanted the chance to review the design plans as well, just to see how it relates to their state highway layout and the work that's going to occur within that area itself. So as you're looking at the plan here, the installation of a traffic signal has always been a center feature of the plan. I think importantly as well is that you see we're adding left turn lanes in the east direction on Clark Road, both at Pine Hills Drive as well as on Meeting Way. This slide nicely shows the proximity of those two intersections, so you can see from a geometric perspective, if you're adding a turn lane at one intersection and the next intersection close by, already created the width essentially to add a turn lane at the second intersection. So it's always safer if we can get the left turn movements into their own lane, so they're out of the way of the through traffic, it gives them better sight lines to vehicles that are traveling in the opposite direction as well. And so this accomplishes that. As I mentioned, the introduction of the raised medians at both locations as well is a traffic calming feature. So as we're looking at this, adding in the turn lanes, plus you see that we've got essentially 5-foot bicycle lanes on either side of the roadway. We're creating a cross-section that by way of the median and the shoulders, it is a traffic calming device. So the through travel lanes don't appear to be excessively wide, just by virtue of the striping and the presence of the median. So we're achieving that in both of these intersections, and that will continue phase 2 improvements as well. A central feature of this, and one of the reasons why the traffic signal is critical at this location, it's not just about moving the traffic, it's for that emergency response. So the traffic signal at the intersection will have what's known as emergency vehicle preemption system. So the signals themselves will have receivers on them that will pick up a flashing strobe from the fire truck or an ambulance that will cause the signal to go in preemption mode. And what that does is it clears the vehicles out in front of the emergency vehicle, so the emergency vehicle can then travel through the intersection without being impeded by any vehicles that might be in front of them. That's a key feature and enhancement of this intersection, and one of the reasons why the traffic signal is very important, because today, as you know, the fire chief, coming out of the fire station, people do exactly what they're supposed to do, which is get out of the way. However, what they often do is they don't leave enough room for the fire truck to get by. But I think also importantly, the chief had expressed the fact that people are well-meaning in trying to get out of the way, but often what they do is they end up in a ditch on the side of the road because they pull too far or they panic. And so this will achieve a safe emergency response from the fire station as well with the preemption system. The chief did also ask that in addition to those receivers at the intersection, there's actually going to be a hardwired connection from the signal back into the fire station. What the goal of that is it's tied into the door, so when the fire door goes up or someone pushes a button at the fire station, it causes the signal to also go into preemption. So that will speed emergency response because the signal will be activated before the fire truck even gets to the intersection. So that's a significant improvement. What I do want to mention in terms of enhancements to the design that you see here, and this is a direct result of comments from the town, is you see the introduction of crosswalks, signalized crosswalks both across Pine Hills Drive as well as across Clark Road at this location. So those are both going to be a part of the design of the intersection, and it's to accommodate pedestrians either within Pine Hills that may be using the trail system, as well as a potential crossing of Clark Road. Even though there's not a sidewalk presently along the south side, this at least puts the infrastructure in place to the extent that someone is walking there, or in the future when the town does decide to build a sidewalk in that area. So that's going to be part of the design. And Mass DOT has also asked that we replace the guardrail that exists along the south side to make it crash-worthy. The current guardrail that's there does not meet current crashworthiness standards, so it will be upgraded to meet the current standards, mostly to reflect the fact that we have smaller sized vehicles as well, and the type of guardrail that's out there is not good at redeflecting vehicles that may strike it, so that's going to be replaced in the area. I'm going to go to the next slide. So in terms of the project timeline, for phase 1 of the project, it's already been reviewed. Final design is actually underway, incorporating the comments, some of which you've seen in the design drawings today. And we've been working very closely with DPW and engineering staff on the design. A contract has already been awarded for the work, and we're expecting for the construction to actually start in the fall of this year. So we'll be starting some of the early construction-related activities to get that underway. And finally, the completion of the work is anticipated in the summer of 2025. So as we look at that timeline, what you'll see is in terms of what phase 2 is going to follow very quickly beyond that, and we'll talk about what phase 2 looks like in a minute. The important part of the phase 2 component of the project is the traffic monitoring, so updating the traffic counts along the corridor. That is underway this month. That's going to form the basis of the design of the phase 2 improvements. because one of those things, if you remember back to our original presentation, was at the Landmark Drive intersection, the current traffic volumes, as we had measured them back, I believe it was in 2022 at the time, did not meet the warrants for a traffic signal. However, that predated the opening of the Bizzuto apartment building in Pine Hills. And so the idea of this updated traffic counts is to get a real measure of that project being open and the amount of traffic that it produces at that intersection. The prediction was that the level of increase in traffic at that location with the apartments being completed and occupied may trip the warrants for a traffic signal, and so that's why these updated traffic counts would kind of validate the assumption that we had there as well. So that's ongoing. Subject to meeting those warrants, or even if we don't meet the warrants, there's still geometric improvements and a design of a signal for that intersection. That design will take place in the spring or winter of 2025. Again, going through the same process with DPW. In this case, Mass DOT will not be involved in that review, so it will just be with the town. The nice thing is we understand from their review of phase 1 what's going to be expected as part of phase 2, and we've actually designed a lot of the improvements on phase 2 already, reflecting the comments from DPW and engineering on the phase 1 improvements. And then finally, the construction of the phase 2 work will basically pick up where phase 1 leaves off, so we anticipate starting construction in the summer of 2025. You can go to the next slide, Deb, please. So this is the phase 2 improvements. You'll see they're very similar to what's occurring at Pine Hills Drive. The only difference really being that we have the Mainstone Boulevard fourth leg of the intersection. So we're installing left turn lanes in both directions at the intersection. That crosswalk that is there today and operates with the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, when the warrants are met and we install the traffic signal, that will become a signalized crossing. So the vehicles will stop when a pedestrian is crossing the intersection. You see the same idea with the median, so we have the same traffic calming, the same idea with the shoulders. So again, the idea is to create a consistent corridor from the Pine Hills Drive intersection all the way through the Landmark Drive intersection with the traffic calming, the left turn lanes at intersections, the widened shoulders, so it will feel like a consistent segment of roadway with those traffic calming features in place. And is that the last slide, Deb?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll turn it back over to you, Deb, for closing remarks.
Yep. So just a few other comments. Again, as a result of the comments from the town, we will be improving the stormwater drainage system. It'll be a closed system, and it will have treatment in place, so that will improve what is the current stormwater design for the road. We will also, after the contract is, or after the work is completed, Pine Hills will be responsible for doing the landscaping of the medians. So they are going to be built as part of the project. They will be left as just sort of graded and with mulch, and then we will come back in and then do up a landscape treatment for those. And we'll review that with the town to make sure it isn't inconsistent with the town's highway design. We will also, as part of the project before it starts, with the town, with Vanessa, with Lawrence Lynch, who's the contractor, and ourselves, we will define and have surveyed the limit of disturbance along in the buffer area that exists today, and we will do a site walk to confirm what the level of disturbance is, if there are areas where we can do some tree save, but also help us understand instances where we may have to come back in after construction and replant or enhance the disturbance in the buffer. Again, the goal is to keep the same, as much as possible, the same well-buffered areas along both the north and south side of Clark Road and Beaver Dam Road that were, really integral to part of the master plan, which was to have a well-buffered entry along Pine Hills Drive. And so we will endeavor to do the project as we need to, but at the same time, be mindful of that obligation. Again, the schedule is a little bit later than we had hoped when we had done the presentation at the joint precinct meeting back in end of January or beginning of February. We had hoped for a summer start to this project, and unfortunately, just the time it takes to design, get comments in, and go through that process, it's pushed it out a little bit further than we had hoped. But as Jeff said, the contract's been awarded. We're finalizing the details and getting that signed up, getting the survey done of the disturbance area, and get that site walk, and then Lynch will be able to go out there and get started on the work. So we're still planning on a start date of this fall. The cost of the project is about 1.9 million, and that doesn't include the post construction work that will have to happen with respect to the landscaping that I mentioned. And that's just the first phase, so the second phase will have its own cost and pricing when we get there. I guess that's really the summary.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if the board has any questions. Mr. Donaldson?
So I'm not sure of the name of the road, but basically it's the entrance going to Rye Tavern, the dirt road there. I'm not sure if I missed it. Was there any looking for any improvements to that road, or what is the plan actually for that road? Because I just want to say, in my opinion, coming off the main road to turn in there causes a slow up of people because they know it's a dirt road that they're about to turn on. So has there been any thought process or to what that's going to happen or anything like that?
So I think the road you're referring to is Old Sandwich Road. Yes. And there is a portion of it that is the dirt road, or what's believed to be the original layout of the road, which dates back to the 1600s. And then there's a portion of it that goes north that was later paved. So as part of the master plan, and at the time when we went through the process and all the meetings with the town, there was quite a bit of discussion around what should happen with Old Sandwich Road. Should it stay a dirt road? It is a town road, unlike all of the other roads that are part of the Pine Hills. Inside the Pine Hills, which of course we're all created and are private. Old Sandwich Road is within the kind of boundaries of the Pine Hills, really the only town road. Clark Road is on the perimeter, Beaver Dam Road is on the perimeter. It was very clear at the time that there was a lot of discussion about what should happen with the road, and the consensus was that it should remain dirt road and be consistent with this sort of historical texture and context. And so there is no plan, and it was in fact specifically a requirement of the master plan that it remain a dirt road. Now, of course, the town can always choose to do otherwise, but in the context of the master plan, we were told to respect that and to plan accordingly. So.
And that's according to the master plan for the Pine Hills. That's what, in my understanding, that is a fluent or changing process, or am I incorrect? Because no,
Yeah.
basically you have to catch me up because I wasn't here prior to all that. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so with respect to the road, the Old Sandwich Road, any decisions about, again, it's really up to the town,
Okay.
but with respect to Pine Hills, we don't have any, the master plan did not give us any rights or authority or ability to change Old Sandwich Road. It is the way it is, and that was the decision at the time of what the town wanted, and we've had to respect that, which we have. So whatever happens with Old Sandwich Road, it's really a question for the town. It's not part of the Pine Hills master plan.
And
Yeah, but if I could just quickly just add to that, I apologize. It's also, we had to go through not only the master plan with the town, but we also had to go through several filings with the state through the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act process. One of the requirements in our certificate that allowed for the development to take place through the state process is that the Pine Hills cannot implement measures that would increase the volume of traffic on the historic portion of Old Sandwich Road. So it's not to say, as Deb had said, that the town, if the town deemed necessary for some improvements to take place at that intersection, that's one thing. But one of the key things of the monitoring that we have to submit to the town and the state is we have to demonstrate that the Pine Hills as designed and constructed is not increasing the volume of traffic that's using the unpaved portion of Old Sandwich Road. That's a specific piece of the monitoring that we have to provide on an annual basis to the state, because it's a part of our certificate that was issued by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, because of the fact that it's a historic road and that was recognized. And so that's why the unpaved portion stayed unpaved. It was purposely paved on the northern section because of the idea that it was to be, the Pine Hills Road network was to be used to connect Clark Road to the unpaved, or to the paved portion.
Sorry you were interrupted. So yeah, you answered my question because I was going to ask you in regards to the northern part of the road that was paved. So that one portion between what's paved and what's not is the historical road overall.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. Mr. Grandy?
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I'm looking forward to the improvements, Phase 1 and Phase 2. Long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett?
No questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming in and doing this, both yourself and to Vanessa. We appreciate it, and I know the residents appreciate getting the updates, knowing as to what's happening. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, that was absolutely terrible. I don't know how everybody else feels, but this is why sometimes Zoom doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda this evening is ZBA 4137. That's 18 Canterbury Drive, J. Cook and C. Aruda. Special permit required per section 205-2, rural residential, and per dimensional table to waive the required side setback to construct an attached garage and addition. This is a ZBA matter, so the planning board is advisory to the ZBA. Good evening.
Good evening. So my name's Xander Orm. I'm from Merrill Engineers and Land Surveyors, and I'm here on behalf of Justin Cook and Catherine Aruda for their proposed garage addition at 18 Canterbury Road. So 18 Canterbury Road is a 40,050 square foot lot. It contains an approximately 850 square foot single-family dwelling with paved driveways, walkway, and a patio in the rear. The lot is located in the rural residential district, and it was created in August of 1973 and is non-conforming in both lot area and frontage. So what the applicant proposes to do is just to add an attached garage to their existing home. The attached garage will be approximately 868 square feet, and it'll also include a rear deck and a second floor office space. So a special permit is required per the rural residential and dimension table regulations in the zoning bylaw to construct the garage partially within the side setback. So the required side setback in rural residential is 35 feet, but they propose to have the garage at about 18.9 feet from the side property line. And that's because, as I said, the lot's non-conforming in lot area. The normal required lot area is about 120,000 square feet. So those setbacks are, meant to be for a lot that's 3 times the width So because of that, they're asking for relief for this garage addition. And yeah, I believe that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Staff?
Thank you. That's the first time we've been buzzed like that. After all these years, can I get my mic reduced a little? Thank you. So as was pointed out, it's a two-story attached garage. It's got 18.9 feet from the side setback. The biggest issue we usually look at with one of these is how the abutter feels. I did speak to them today, and the abutters on this side where the addition is occurring have no objection. So again, it's something fairly common that we see, and the setback is still a decent 20-foot setback.
Thank you. Let me see if there's anybody who wants to make public comment on this. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to be heard regarding this matter? Is there anyone on Zoom who wishes to be heard regarding this matter?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, I will bring it back to the board then. Mr. Bennett?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Grandy?
Through the chair, no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. Mr. Donaldson?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. My only questions is, I note that the plan actually indicates that it's not just an office space necessarily, but part of the bedroom space as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So is there any issue with respect to increased septic?
So the current lot, or the current septic system is a 4-bedroom septic, and the current home only has 3 bedrooms, so we'd be increasing it to 4 bedrooms, and so the capacity should be perfectly fine in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Anything further from the board? Seeing nothing, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to recommend approval?
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It is unanimous. Good luck at the ZBA.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is ZBA 4138, 10 Goldfinch Lane. Elaine and Andrea Kelly, special permit required for section 203-2B2D4 to construct a retaining wall exceeding 12 feet in height, and Mr. Bennett has recused himself from this matter.
Thank you. Rick Grady from Grady Consulting on Zoom here. This is an existing home that we're working on with the applicants to replace an existing cinder block retaining wall that has failed. We did provide images or photos of the existing wall. We're replacing it substantially in place with a much more substantial modular block wall. The maximum height on it is about 13 feet, so we're just over the 12-foot maximum height, which is the reason why we're requesting a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. There were some comments from DPW. The applicants would be glad to, as well as Lee Hartman also, applicants would be glad to put a fence barrier at the top of the retaining wall as requested. We did submit a minor revision to the plan today to provide a 5-foot separation distance from the edge of the traveled way to the back of the modular blocks. Be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Staff?
So this is, in my opinion, a very easy one. You have a retaining wall right now that's failed and falling down and a hazard to both people on the property and in the neighborhood. They're looking to replace it with something that meets code. It's a little unfortunate that something like this that's so important needs to go through this process, but that's the way the bylaw is written. I would also point out that this has gone to the Conservation Commission too, and they have approved it. So again, it's just repairing an existing wall. It was an old cinder block. I'm sure mom and pop installed without design, and they're now got a fully engineered wall to replace it. And with the comments that were made that the DPW's asked for, that they've agreed to, we're recommending that the board provide a favorable recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Thank you. I will open this to public comment. Is there anyone in the room wishing to speak to this matter? Seeing no one, is there anyone on Zoom who wishes to speak to this matter?
I'm not seeing anyone looking to be recognized.
Okay, great. Then I will bring it back to the board for questions. Mr. Grandy, questions?
No questions, and the wall definitely needs to be replaced. I've looked at the report and the pictures, and sooner the better.
Thank you. Mr. Donaldson?
I'm in 100% agreement with Mr. Grandy. Just looking at what's before us, this is something that needs to be done and has my full approval.
Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. My only question is to verify that this wall is not being expanded in any way, that this is in essence a replacement of the existing footprint of the wall, subject, of course, to the DPW comments. Is that correct?
That is correct. The only minor change is along the property line. We are raising it just a little bit to provide a block from the neighbors because it kind of slopes down towards it today, but it's essentially in the same size location as the existing retainage.
Very good. Thank you very much for that clarification. If there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to recommend approval to the ZBA. Do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. Next on our agenda, we have a public hearing. It is B465, 131, 133 South Street. The Plymouth Planning Board will hold a public hearing in the 1820 Courtroom, 26 Court Street, Plymouth, Massachusetts, on Wednesday, September 25, 2024. This is actually now continued from the original to October 9, 2024, at 7:20 p.m. to hear the petition of McGreco, Inc., requesting a special permit per Section 203-7C2 to allow a driveway closer than 55 feet from the intersection of street layout lines, per Section 203-7F2 to reduce required parking area width, per 203-7J and use table footnote 6B3 to waive number of required parking spaces, per Section 205-6 residential 20 multifamily zone and use table A3 and footnote 6 to allow a multifamily dwelling, per dimensional table residential 20 multifamily to waive required front and side setback for a multifamily building, and per Section 207-7 for inclusionary housing to construct a two-story, 24-unit multifamily building located at 131 and 133 South Street, map 27, lots 14D-131 and 14D-133. The petitioner or his or her representative or any other person interested in desiring to be heard on this request should appear at the time and place designated. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. Nice to see you all. For the record, Rob D'Ambroso, attorney at law with D'Ambroso Law here in Plymouth. My suggestion, if it pleases the chair and the board, was rather than rehash the presentation that was presented to this board last time and the robust discussion that ensued, I thought I would touch upon, some of the key concerns that were raised at the last hearing, how we believe they're either addressed or, or not terribly relevant, and then turn it over to Jeff Dirk, our traffic consultant, to discuss some of the proposed improvements to address some of those concerns, if that works for you guys.
That sounds good to us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So I've got with me here Mark Flaherty, our civil engineer of Flaherty & Stefani, Rick Veo, principal of Meg Ryko, Inc., the project proponent, is with us remotely on Zoom. So again, as I mentioned at the last hearing, there were some concerns raised, which we've summarized, or done our best to summarize on this slide here. So again, Mr. Bolton noted the purpose of the project here, which is this two-story, all affordable one-bedroom rental unit structure. Again, these are some of the concerns that were raised. The key concerns, I think were raised by several folks at the last hearing, so thought we'd kind of touch upon them. So drainage, that was one concern. Again, just to sort of reiterate, I think the point that Rick made at the last hearing is any new development by law has to keep its stormwater on its own property. That's required. The DPW thoroughly vets it. So that's going to be the case. Again, we've submitted a stormwater report, drainage report to the DPW. That's going to be the case. And I think it also bears mentioning that to the extent there was any fear of stormwater departing the site, this happens to be the low point of the surrounding area. So I think that, physically it's quite unlikely that any water would be able to leave the site, just given the topography. Children, so again, I think some folks said, well, what if there's a bunch of children running around? I think it was either a safety issue and or just a density of community issue. Again, just to reiterate, with one-bedroom apartments, you typically wouldn't expect to see any children. Again, Meg Ryko's got a number of one-bedrooms. I don't think there are any families in any of those one-bedroom units. So again, I think that concern's a bit unfounded. Parking, we touched on parking. Again, as Mr. Veo noted at the last hearing, your bylaw does suggest that 5 additional guest spaces be provided with this bedroom count. The original plan that was presented didn't include those, but we have, and I can kind of hop to it here. There it is. So again, you guys have, plans you could probably see a little better, but there are 5 sites outlined in, 5 parking spaces rather, outlined in red on this plan. So again, at the board's discretion, if the board prefer the parking versus having that area be open space, either one is acceptable to the applicant. Again, at the last hearing, sort of the case was made that there's more than enough parking with what was originally presented, but in response to the concerns, if that's the board's pleasure, my client's happy to provide those additional 5 spaces, so we'll defer to the board's judgment relative to that parking concern. Fire department, since that last hearing, we do have a letter from the fire department acknowledging that the submitted plans and the turning analysis meet the fire department's requirements. A very simple 1-sentence letter from Battalion Chief Malaguti. So the fire department has no issue with the site design. And again, with that, I think that really it's now time to touch on traffic. So that seemed to be the biggest concern last time. There was a lot of comment about how this intersection can be treacherous. There's a lot of traffic in this area, et cetera. So again, just to set the stage here, as this board knows, this project and my client can't solve all of the traffic problems that this area has. I think that's self-evident. What we can do is 2 things. One, we can assure you that the project as proposed is not going to make traffic any worse. And again, Jeff Dirk will go through the analysis. Again, you had a chance now to review his report. I think 162 trips per day, which is a minimal number of trips, is not expected to impact traffic adversely in any way. So again, this project won't negatively affect traffic. To the contrary, this project offers the opportunity to correct some of the issues. And again, we can offer some off-site mitigation to make this intersection safer and some on-site mitigation. So that's really, I think, the thrust of what Jeff Dirk would like to present here, both the analysis of where we are now, how this project will or won't impact traffic, and then the improvements that will make things better on and off-site for this intersection and this local area. Jeff can give us chapter and verse, and then when he's done, I know Rick would like to make a few words and close with a few remarks of his own, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Please proceed.
Okay. Thanks. Jeff, do you want to take it away here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, for the record, Jeffrey Dirk with Vanessa and Associates. We're the transportation consultants on this project. Lee, before we get started, are you able to drive the slides, or would you like me to?
Might be easier for you to do it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. You can let me know if you can see.
Give me a second.
Were you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to, as our attorney had mentioned, going to walk through the traffic study with transportation assessment that we had prepared. And I know there was some concern of continuing us to this next hearing. What I would say is not only it gave some time for the board, obviously, to review the study that was submitted, but thoughtful comments and review from DPW and engineering, which you will see. I'll work it into my presentation, but you'll also see a concept plan that we developed with engineering as well, that we're looking to advance as a part of the project, and I know Rick will speak about that as well. So a lot of good things happened between the last hearing and now with respect to refining some of the transportation analysis for the project. So as I mentioned, I'm going to walk through the transportation assessment that's been submitted to the board. There's really no new pieces of information other than I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the motor vehicle crashes that are happening at the intersection, and then that will allow us to look at the concept plan that we worked on with DPW and engineering and show you how what's being proposed will address the existing crash patterns that are happening at the intersection. So just by way of an overview of the assessment itself, there are standards we have to follow in preparing the assessment, and those standards are set by the Department of Transportation. We work very closely with Lee and his staff, also to understand town requirements and make sure that the study itself is reflective of conditions within the town, so that Lee informs us as to projects that are happening in the area, any other things that are local related items that should be included in the traffic study. So that's done at a baseline level before we undertake any analysis as a part of the project. And that's all been done as a part of this assessment. We look at all modes of transportation. That's why it's a transportation assessment. So we're looking at motor vehicle traffic as well as pedestrians, bicycles, and transit riders as well, and the safety of all of those users of the roadway as a part of the assessment. So as our attorney mentioned, as we're looking at the impacts of the project, and when I'm speaking of impacts, it's how do changes in intersection operations, in this case at the intersection of South Street, Braley Lane, and Nook Road, how do delays and queuing resulting from the delays that occur at that intersection, how do they change as a result of the addition of the traffic from this project? In a couple of slides, we'll see how much increase in traffic the project represents. When we're looking at the peak hours, so when school might be getting out or when you're going to work or coming home from work, the project is going to produce somewhere between 10 to 12 new vehicles on the roadway. Our driveway's on Braley Lane, so that traffic's all going to be coming out on Braley Lane or coming and going, and then coming up to the intersection and either going straight across, making a left or right hand turn. So 10 to 12 vehicles over the course of an hour. That's one added vehicle every 5 to 6 minutes during that peak travel period. So when we're looking at the conditions before and after the addition of the project's traffic, as our attorney had mentioned, you don't see any meaningful impact. The impact is measurable. What we showed in terms of that measurable impact is about an additional 4 seconds of additional delay at the intersection, particularly on the Braley Road approach. But that added delay did not translate into an increase in vehicle queuing on any of the approaches to the intersection. What we did note as a part of our analysis, and probably as everyone knows, when school is before school or after school, pick-up and drop-offs are happening on the Nook Road approach, there's congestion on that lane. So trying to get out from Nook Road during any of those time periods is difficult. And so we did show that where delays are occurring at the intersection, it's on that approach to South Street. The Braley Lane approach didn't have those extended delays. It was really confined to just that one leg of the intersection in terms of its operations. Our driveway does operate with limited delay. Braley Lane, as the residents commented, it's a low volume, low speed road, at least as it is approaching South Street. So there's not a lot of traffic, and the speeds as the vehicles are coming to and from South Street aren't excessive to the point where it interferes with the operation of the driveway to this project site itself. We are implementing improvements, as I mentioned, that we will speak about at the end of my slideshow, that are designed to further reduce the speed of traffic as it's turning to or from South Street onto Braley Lane as well as Nook Road. So it's a central piece of this project for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about that when we look at the concept plan itself. Independent of the project, the South Street, Brady Lane, Nook Road intersection, the number of crashes that are happening at that intersection are disproportionate or higher than what would be expected based on the volume of traffic going through the intersection. So because of that, we did undertake a more detailed analysis of the crashes that are happening so that we could use that to inform the improvements that we're going to undertake at the intersection. And I'll talk about that again as we look at the concept plan. But that was done with DPW and engineering. So we provided a supplemental report, which the board should have seen last week, that looked at the causes, where the crashes are happening, what the causes are, so that we could use that to design the improvements at the intersection. And then lastly, lines of sight at the driveway. So we measured the sight lines, both approaching the driveway along Braley Lane, as well as if you're exiting the property, looking to the left or right, to make sure that you have proper sight lines for the speed of traffic that's approaching, not the statutory or posted speed limit, but the speed that vehicles are actually driving as they're approaching the intersection. So the board's all familiar with the project site. It's shown here with the yellow where the site is located or shown directly across from the public library, which, as the board knows, there is a GATRA bus stop at the library itself, so that's a great amenity for the project to be able to reduce automobile and parking demands associated with the project. So we do want to have that connectivity, and that's why I think, as you've seen it in the initial presentation, sidewalks. We'll be improving the crosswalks at the intersection. So we want to make sure that we have a safe walking environment for residents of this project to connect to the library as well as to that bus stop itself. And the improvements that we plan on implementing will enhance those features that are a design piece of the project. This slide shows the existing pedestrian and bicycle facilities that exist at the intersection. So what you see in the orange lines are where there are existing sidewalks. So you see it's existing sidewalks along both sides of South Street, both sides of Nook Road. The Nook Road sidewalk ends at the entrance to the library on the north side. It does continue along the south side to the school itself. The blue lines are where there are crosswalks. So there's crosswalks across all four legs of the intersection itself. And then you may know that South Street is a bicycle route 1, so it's actually a designated bicycle route in the Commonwealth, and it's bike route 1, so it serves as a bicycle accommodation for this area for traffic. Bicycle accommodations to the canal and across over onto the Cape itself by way of bike route 1, which continues along Long Pond Road as well beyond where this property is located. I mentioned the GATRA bus stop, which is located at the public library. Before I go to the next slide, what's missing, as you see here, is obviously sidewalks along Braley Lane to connect to the project site. So again, that's been used as something to inform the concept plan that's been developed, as well as what we heard at the last public hearing. So you'll see that in the concept plan again as something that was a great addition to the work that's going to be done at the intersection. So looking at the traffic characteristics of the project, that's what's shown on the slide here. So we've shown entering and exiting trips, and the far right-hand side is the total trips. So reading from top to bottom, the large number at the top, the average weekday, the 162, that's the 24-hour number. So essentially, if you counted every vehicle that entered and exited the site over a 24-hour period, that's the number we expect that you would arrive at for 24 dwelling units at this site. That includes all vehicles, FedEx, UPS, Amazon trucks, DoorDash, anything that would be associated with deliveries to a residential community. These are based on current statistics, and so it does include all of those delivery service providers. So again, Amazon's in there, DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, all of those type of trips are in these numbers because they're current version of the trip generation manual, which includes those types of uses. The next two numbers, the first number, the 10 that you see on the far right-hand side, that's the amount of traffic that will be produced during the weekday morning peak hours, so a 1 hour period in the morning. The peak hour in the morning is 7 to 8 in this area, so we'll be adding 10 trips to the amount of traffic that's produced to between 7 and 8. The volume of traffic that occurs during that time period on South Street is about 700 vehicles during that peak hour. So the 10 gets added to the 700 vehicles that are on that roadway. The next number, the 12, that's the traffic volume during the 1 hour period in the evening that occurs between 4 and 6 in the evening. So the peak hour in this area, there's a peak hour with the school that occurs somewhere around 2:30 to 3:30. But the roadway peak hour is actually higher than the school peak hour. And during the roadway peak hour, which again, it's somewhere between 5 and 6 in the evening is when the road peak hour happens. There's about 1,000 vehicles on South Street going by the project site. We're going to add 12 additional vehicles to that volume that's on South Street. So you can see this incremental increase during the peak hours is relatively small. And so that's why, as we're looking at the impacts of the project, we can show that there's any significant changes or increases in delays or queuing. In fact, no increase in queuing at the intersection, just because the 10 and 12 is fairly dispersed over the peak traffic volume hours. I do want to mention, as I had said, these numbers are based on actual measurements that are done at similar communities. So the trip estimates are similar multifamily residential communities applied to the 24 units that this project represents at this site. And these are the numbers that we'd expect based on those studies that have been done at similar communities. So this slide shows the dispersal of traffic. So the 10 and 12 that I mentioned during the peak hours, when we look at how traffic uses the intersection with South Street, this is how the traffic disperses itself. So about 30% of the trips are destined to the north, 60% to the south, 10% heading toward the school line Nook Road. So that's based on looking at existing traffic patterns as well as U.S. Census data for residents of the town of Plymouth where you work. And so that arrives at this distribution. So as we look at the 10 and 12, it comes up to the intersection, and this is how it distributes itself to each of the legs. So most of the traffic is turning right when it's exiting, turning left when it's coming back to the project site from the south on South Street. So after we've undertaken the analysis, we have a series of recommendations. There's two sets of recommendations in this case. There's the site access recommendation. So these are the things that Mark includes on his site plan. So it's the recommendations for driveway width being a minimum of 22 feet, stop sign control for vehicles exiting the project site. Then we have standards that are applied, and these are good practices as they relate to design of project sites. So making sure the aisle widths are sufficient for emergency vehicles, which you've heard the fire chief is applying that the driveway and the circulation all meets their requirements for serving the project. Standardization of signs and pavement markings within the site, being compliant with the manual and uniform traffic control devices. Providing sidewalk connections between the building and South Street, and that is actually going to happen at 2 locations. We're also adding a sidewalk along Gravy Lane, which I'll show you in a minute. Making sure we have ADA compliance for any crossings or sidewalk designs within the project. And then the last 2 recommendations as they relate to the site plan are dealing with sight lines. The sight lines meet what's required, but we want to make sure no signs or landscaping are placed within the site triangle areas. And then lastly, any snow accumulation, so snow piles that may be plowed against where the driveway is that would be within the site triangle areas. We do want those removed as soon as practicable after a snow event so that we're not inhibiting the sight lines. So then the off-site improvements. So we have a series of off-site improvements, and these have actually been expanded from the transportation assessment based on comments from DPW and engineering. I might as well just go right to the concept plan because this shows all of those improvements. So a central piece of what these improvements are is to address what we heard from the residents and what the board had expressed as well as it relates to this intersection, which is when we're looking at the crashes that are occurring at the intersection, one of the primary contributing causes is the speed of traffic on South Street. So as we're looking at the movements at the intersection themselves and the crashes in particular, what we see is there was 20 crashes that occurred over the 5-year period between 2017 and 2021, which is the certified period for crash data that Mass DOT and the registry have available, meaning that they've reviewed the crashes that have been provided to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and they've certified that the data meets all of the requirements, they've removed any extraneous information, and then they're able to actually geocode or locate them to this intersection in particular, and so then we can use that data to be able to look at traffic patterns. So looking at that 5-year period for which the data has been validated, there were 20 crashes that occurred at the intersection. 9 of those crashes involved a vehicle coming from Nook Road looking to make a left or right-hand turn onto South Street. 4 of them occurred as a vehicle coming from Braley Lane. Those 13 crashes occurred either with a vehicle making a left or right-hand turn being struck by a vehicle on South Street as they're traveling through the intersection. So what that would say to us is it's a couple of things. It's the speed of traffic on South Street, but it also deals with one of the things that we talked about at the last meeting, which is sight distance limitations posed by vegetation on the project site, as well as on the opposite corner of the intersection. So that would be on the southeast corner of the intersection. So as we look at those type of crash patterns, what we want to do is we design these improvements. We want to implement features that would address what those contributing causes would be. So what we've done in the case of looking at speeding and sight lines, so with the speed of traffic, we've introduced some traffic calming features by way of tightening up the corner radius. It's a very wide intersection, so there's the ability to be able to provide smaller corner radii, which slow the turning traffic down at the intersection. It also pinches the intersection out so it doesn't appear to be as wide. The other important thing that that does is it shortens the pedestrian crossing distance, so that the distance that a pedestrian is crossing South Street is exposed to through traffic is reduced because we've shortened the distance by pulling the intersection in and not making it so wide. So that's a safety feature as it relates to pedestrians. So in that case, we're addressing speed by the corner radius, which also addresses safety as it relates to pedestrians crossing the intersection. There were no pedestrian-related crashes, but that's certainly a safety feature that's a benefit of reducing the corner radii at the intersection. The other thing that we're doing is trimming the vegetation within the public right-of-way. So we're doing some, I would say, extended trimming on our site, and I think Rick had spoken about that, to open up and improve the sight line. So if you're on Braley Lane and you want to make a left-hand turn, your sight line looking to the north will be improved with what we're doing on the vegetation trimming in that intersection. Also planning to do the same on the southeast corner of the intersection, which again, if you're exiting from Nook Road and you're looking to the south, this will open up the sight line so that you can see that vehicle that's coming at you. The sight lines to the north on the library side are already open so that you're able to see that. So that's going to deal with what we saw as one of the primary contributing factors of the crashes at the intersection. The other thing is a comment from DPW, and I believe this is in your packet in terms of DPW's comments. What they asked for is radar speed signs to be installed both to the north and south on South Street to be able to do 2 things. It lets you know what the speed limit is on South Street, but then it lets you know how fast you're going. So that is a proven speed reduction measure. The other important thing about those type of signs is it actually collects data that's useful for the police department. So it would allow them to be able to look at when is the speeding occurring, so that with the limited resources that are available, it allows them to be able to target specific time periods of the day when they are seeing higher travel speeds, and they can do some enforcement. The combination of the radar speed signs with enforcement is highly successful in reducing speed. So rather than just a radar trailer that they leave out there, which has a distinct effect during that time period which it's there, a permanent installation is collecting that data continuously, and again, it allows for enforcement to take place as well during those targeted time periods, and then going back and revisiting to see if that caused any effects in terms of lowering the travel speeds at the intersection. The other thing that we're doing in terms of improvements along South Street is installing enhanced signs and pavement markings. So we're installing intersection head warning signs in advance of the intersection with street name signs on them as well. There will be reflective yellow tape put on those signposts, so under low visibility conditions, someone's going to know that they're approaching the intersection even if they're traveling at a higher speed. It's still going to inform them that conflicts may be approaching at the intersection itself, or to expect conflicts. Stop signs will be replaced. We're putting reflective red tape on the sign posts as well, again, to make them highly visible during the low light conditions themselves. Lastly, in terms of the improvements, as we mentioned, we are providing sidewalk connections at 2 locations from the building to the South Street sidewalk. We also discussed at the last meeting the fact that there's a school bus waiting area at Braley Lane, close to South Street, where there's not a sidewalk. So what you see on the plan here is the South Street sidewalk along the project site will be wrapped around the corner and extended to the project site driveway. And there's an area where we're bumping out the sidewalk to provide a widened area for a bus stop, so that the children, even if they're standing in the sidewalk area, there's additional sidewalk width that's being provided as a bus stop area, so that they're not standing near the street. You certainly don't need to stand at the street. The bus stop is set back from the South Street intersection so that the bus can make the turn, be positioned in the area where it's not blocking the intersection, but it's still visible to anyone that might be turning. So you'll be able to see the red flashing lights. You're not going to turn right around the corner and have the bus be right there, but it's also not close enough that the bus would block the crosswalk or that it would impede the flow of traffic along South Street. So it's been purposely located where you see it along the Braley Lane intersection to address the concerns. So these improvements, as I've described them, with the addition of the radar speed signs, are consistent with what DPW, we discussed with DPW and with engineering, and I think it's also consistent with the addition of those radar speed signs to what the request was from engineering. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have now or later on this evening.
Thank you very much. I know Mr. Veo wanted to speak as well. Is now the time that you'd like to speak, or did he want to?
Mr. Chairman, that's your call. If you guys, if the board would like to ask questions, I can certainly wait to sum up if that makes more sense.
That's fine. Thank you. I will bring this back to staff first.
So just a couple of comments. So we had the public hearing opened at the last meeting. Extensive public comment was made to the board. The focus here was to come back and talk about the traffic, look at the traffic report, see what comes back. You do have the memo from the town engineer. I would point out that there is requirements here that the improvements discussed would be built into a condition that they're obligated to do those and required. In addition, when you look at that report, there are 6 other comments that say either to be addressed prior to construction or to be addressed prior to occupancy. So those would be conditions we would add to the vote, in addition to one requiring that these off-site improvements be done and done at the expense of the proponent.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to open this back up again for public comment. 1 second, we'll call on people. I'm going to remind people that public comment is limited to 3 minutes per our policy. If you need more time, you can request it. It'll be up to the board to decide whether or not to grant that additional time. This is a special permit application to the planning board for affordable housing. You've heard the exemptions that they're looking for. Those are the things that we can discuss. I know that there's been CPC money requested for this project. That's not something that is within the purview of this board. We don't decide whether they get money or not. That goes to town meeting on the 19th. We have had a great deal of public comment. We appreciate that. Obviously, we have already factored that into our deliberations, and we'll continue to factor that into our deliberations as we go forward. We certainly are not going to restrict anybody in terms of what they can say. That is absolutely up to you. But again, the purpose of reopening public comment here tonight primarily is to address the new information that you've heard so that you can comment on that as it impacts you. But again, you can comment as you will. We're not going to tell you what to say, but I'm going to let you know that, again, we've heard the prior comments and we have factored those in. So I would suggest that if you've got something new to say, that would be what you should start off with. Public comment is directed to the board, not to the petitioner, not to anybody else. And as you know, many people have very many of the same comments. We don't want to cut people short, but at some point, if we are getting just repetition, I'll acknowledge that we understand the issues, and if people don't have something new, I will entertain a motion from the board to close the public comment. With that, I'm also going to once again ask people to refrain from disrupting the proceedings, and that no applause, no calling out. Whether you agree or disagree with somebody, everybody has the right to be heard in the same fashion. So please be respectful of the proceedings. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start. Yes, Mr. Bennett.
Could I also ask that the next person to speak, please stand and be ready to take the podium immediately after the person before you, rather than us having to wait for people to get out of their seats and move up to the front. It'll just move it along a little quicker to get us all out of here sooner.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with this gentleman. Yes, you, sir?
Well, I greatly appreciate you hearing me, but I'd like to pass on my voice to the young lady that also lives on Braley Lane.
Please, always happy to defer if someone wishes to defer.
Well, she just wished upon it, so I'm going to pass it off to her.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, how are you? So I just wanted to start by
If
saying
you could do me a favor, just please introduce yourself.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to start off by saying my name is Natalie Doherty,
Microphone close, too.
and I live at 8 Milts Way. I wanted to start with the notes that they put on the board. First of all, not expecting children. I am expecting children to be there, single parents living there with visitation or grandparents having custody or visits from their grandkids. And I don't understand what Mr. Bayo is going to do if there are children there. He's not expecting it, but we are. And I can't get past the parking. So there's 24 units. How many will have 2 cars? I think he's betting on people having no cars. I'm betting on most of those one-bedrooms having 2 cars. And he spoke about elderly living there. What about caregivers? He's saying that there's going to be an extra 5 spaces. I just don't think the math adds up. You have 24 units and you have 32 parking spaces. I just don't see that. The other point that Mr. Bayo made was in the lease, they're going to have no turning right on Braley written into the lease. Who is going to enforce that? We can't enforce speeding on South Street, but we're going to enforce no turning right onto Braley. And I wanted to ask Mr. Vail, if somebody does turn right on Braley, what's going to happen? Will you be evicting them? I mean, I just think you're coming up here and saying whatever you think is going to make the board put this through without any thought of how you're going to enforce any of this. And I wanted to say, I myself spoke to Bill Coyle at the DPW last week. I had a great conversation with him, because I think Mr. Vayo said that basically we need this project to go in order to have improvements made to Braley or the intersection. And he said that's not the case. They are looking at remedies to make that intersection safer. And he went into great length about what they've been doing about the sight lines. A lot of it was over my head, but I can tell that they've talked about it. I also want to make the point that my son is at Rising Tide. He's 12 years old. And he gets the bus across South Street. So I drive him to the end of Braley at 5 or 7 in the morning. I have to get out of the car, and I have to stand there, and I invite anyone to come and watch. And the cars, I have to go out and put my hands up, and I have to stand there to cross them. And then when the bus comes, I pull out, because people just want to get right by that bus. And again, I invite anybody that wants to be there at 5 or 7 to watch this. And, okay, the other question that a lot of the neighbors had and I myself have is, why does the entrance have to be on Braley? Why can't the entrance be where the driveway is now? I don't understand that. And again, I invite all of you to drive down South Street, take a left onto Braley, and right there is going to be the driveway. It doesn't make sense to me. And if you could explain why it can't be on South Street where the driveway is now, okay? And lastly, the traffic report that you paid for, if I wanted to get everyone in the neighborhood together to pay for a traffic report, I believe we could dispute every point that you've made, okay? So that's what my comments are.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir, please. Good
Yeah,
evening.
Ken Randall, 9 Brayley Lane. My grandparents were on Brayley Lane. They've been here since the 60s. I think I'm the only one, I don't know how long these people have been on Brayley Lane. Anybody? Since the 60s? 70s? So I know what I'm talking about. That was a cow pasture, a sand lot, 3 houses. And now you're going to put a family dwelling at that end, 1 bedroom. A family has 3, at least 2. That's a family. That's not going to be a family house. It's going to be a boarding house. That's what you're putting in. So just tell us that and let it go. That's what it's going to be, because no family is going to move in there and pay those prices with no amenities when you can go right up the street. There's a pool, gym, and everything else with all these new condos they're putting in Plymouth. So say what it is and stop lying to us. That's all.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Devin Gavoni. I live on Brayley Lane, and I just see a social location problem here. So I see a lot of professional men with these really beautiful diagrams and big words and lovely things to say. And I just wondered, are any of them going to be moving in there? Have they lived in places like this? And how can they control human behavior? So you have one person signing a lease. Who's to say 4 adults aren't going to be living there to make that rent together? Like, who is going to police that? What happens in these situations? So I see all the improvements on the road. That's fantastic. But you can't control human behavior. Brayley Lane is supposed to be a place where people drive slowly. They don't. I avoid parts of it when I take my walks because it's dangerous. 2 cars can just about get past each other. So I am curious if there's going to be improvements. So I see a sidewalk, it stops at the end of Brayley Lane. Are they going to extend that at some point? If so, they're going to be putting it into the road, or they're going to be putting it into many of our driveways. So I'm just curious, like, what is the long-term plan around this and human behavior? Who is going to police it? How can the people building socially locate themselves into the situations of the people moving into these situations? We are in economic times that people are desperate. People are going to be signing leases, and you're going to have tons of people in there. You're going to have multi-cars, like has already been said. So it just feels really gross, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Tamari. I live on Sweet Amanda's Way. I drive down. I have a small business in downtown Plymouth. I'm up and down Brayley Lane. I think all of the board and Mr. Veo and Mr. Dirk, all of them understand that it's a dangerous intersection. My concern about Mr. Dirk's presentation is that it doesn't tell us what DPW would, if money was not an issue, what would really be needed to make adding 24 units to that intersection safe. So there could be a wide variance between what DPW or an independent, not somebody hired by Mr. Veo, would say this is what would make this safe, as opposed to this is maybe feasibly what could be afforded. So to put some sort of fixture that's going to tell somebody on South Street, you know, there's an intersection coming up, this is how fast you're going, cannot control how fast that person's going to drive. It's not going to control that that person is late to work and has to get on is trying to get on the highway. So I just don't understand how this board can make these sort of decisions without knowing exactly, and they don't say exactly what this intersection needs. So again, to say, well, these are, we'll put some strips of reflection on the stop signs, and we'll put this permanent fixture that's going to tell somebody what their speed is not going to help us who are coming off of Braley Lane onto South Street, which is terrifying. It also doesn't take into consideration, so there's Roxanne Weatherby also lives in the neighborhood. I learned from her what to do in the morning to avoid to get from Braley to South Street. She goes through Wagon Wheel. And my daughter, who's here, could tell you that's what we end up doing in the morning during the rush hour, in the morning, in the evening, even though it takes longer. So if there's just two of us, me and Roxanne, who's present, she's present via Zoom, there's got to be others who are doing the same thing. So it's not taking that into consideration. If you have people who are already going a longer way because it's so hazardous to take that left or take that right off of Braley Lane, they don't have all the facts. Also, if they make that if they make that turn sharper, I understand what he's saying, that, somebody's going to have to slow down more to take a right onto Braley Lane, but it just misses the point. It's the people who are just flying past Braley Lane when we're trying to get out, which is a big issue. So to put 24 units, and everybody here knows, it's not just going to be 24 cars, and trying to trick us by, like, we're not intelligent.
You're over 3 minutes. Please wrap up, please.
To say that it is, it's only adding 10 cars is just insulting, like we don't know how to do math. This project is not meant for this site, and everybody here knows it, and I don't understand how this can get approved.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rob Carlazon. I live at 8 Braley Lane. I just want to kind of add on to some of the comments earlier about the location of the driveway entrance onto Braley Lane. My question to the board and to the applicant is why, or was the entrance to South Street considered instead of Braley Lane? Obviously, we've talked about the safety issues at that intersection. And I guess the question is why it's not on South Street. Every other multifamily condo complex, rehab facility, townhouse complex has an entrance on South Street. I guess I don't understand why we're trying to slam this busy driveway onto a small lane, Braley Lane. I know that there's a driveway at the rehab facility, which is to the north of the property, and I do understand there's a driveway entrance to the library across the street. I know both of those entrances were not a part of the traffic study. To me, having the driveway entrance on South Street closer to those features would greatly increase the safety of the driveway entrance and getting it off Braley Lane, and get it away from an already dangerous intersection, which is shown on the traffic report. And obviously, I agree with everybody else before me, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Good
My
evening.
name is Amy Van Tangley, and I actually live on the corner of Braley. And to say that there's 20 accidents in 5 years, maybe that the police showed up, but I would say on average, minimum, 1 a month. And not just, and you can't blame it on the school kids, because it's honestly not the school kids that are in the accidents. They're actually better drivers than who are getting in these accidents. But again, not to continue with that, but that turn, when you turn, my driveway is right here, so it would be just literally pretty much right in front of, I would have to go right diagonal. So if I was to come out and they were coming out, somebody's to come around the corner, that person coming around the corner is going to most definitely hit this person who's now not in a wide enough spot. Now you have two cars right there and a person coming in off of South. My concern is with the kids walking or when the library has their functions. We just had a function at the library. The street, I did take pictures, had people lined up on the side of the lawn. I don't have an issue with that. You're going to the library. But you can't get down the street if you're parked on the side. If you have a driveway there, once again, if those cars, it's not safe there for the kids. It's just not a safe area over there to be having that type of increase of traffic and people. And I also don't understand if they're one-bedroom town, that's supposed to be a family. Because as far as I know, you can't really raise your family in a one-bedroom. That's not real. You know, but with that being said, I just would like to see it more of secured area and not worried about who's pulling out of where and who's the next to get hit. So, with that said.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia Kovach, and I live on 7 Sweet Amanda's Way, and I want to talk on behalf of all the kids that already live on Braley Lane and the neighboring neighborhoods, because with the bus system, it's expensive to take buses to school, and especially there's no late bus that goes through Wagon Wheel and through Braley Lane and all those roads, so all of us have to walk to and from school a lot of the days, especially if we stay after. Last week, I just walked home. It took me 15 minutes in the rain, and it's there's always cars and heavy traffic there, and there's no sidewalk for us, so it's unsafe for all the school kids that already live there that have to walk. And with the increase in traffic and every weekday when there are kids walking to school, walking to school events, the football games every Friday night, I could tell you that there's at least 10 kids that I know that walk to school every morning. And especially in my neighborhood right now, there's a younger generation of kids, and I live in a cul-de-sac neighborhood. I think there could be 10 to 15 littler kids that are in elementary school right now. And when they grow up, if this project goes in and there's people established living there, when they're older and they have to walk to school, walk to these events as well, it's going to be a big problem, I guess, that there's no sidewalk and that the increase in traffic is unsafe for us. And I also wanted to talk about how there's so many teen drivers. Every morning when I do walk to school or when I take the bus, I see at least 10 kids that I do know from school driving to school in the mornings. And teen drivers, any study says that teen drivers have a lot of accidents, and in the neighborhood there's a lot of teenagers, and I'm going to start driving soon. I'm 15 years old, so soon when I start driving, I'm worried about the safety of learning how to drive and being scared of my own neighborhood in an intersection so close to me. That's something that kind of scares me. So I just wanted to tell you guys that kid perspective, I guess.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Kathy Lalonde, and I live on South Street. I'm just going to reiterate just a little bit what I had heard, because most of it, again, 24 units, 20 of the units are going to go with 80% of what they consider local median income. And they're assuming that around $2,300 a month, which I don't know how that's considered low income, will be the 20 units. Anybody that's paying $2,300 a month, both people are going to be working. I don't know how he can imagine that 32 parking spaces are going to accommodate that, and possibly 5 that you're going to add on if needed for visitors. And adding 10, or even if it's only 10 more cars to that 20 people, which it's not going to be, 2 people have to work to pay for $2,300. And under that, there are going to be 2 apartments at a 60% rate, and then in the deeper count, there's going to be 2 apartments at a 30% rate, subsidized by taxpayers' money. So that added, you can't assume, and I'm going to use the word assume a lot, you can't assume, you know what they say about assuming, that there are not going to be added cars. There are going to be added cars, and they're all going to go out right now on Braley Lane, which brings up another point, 18 feet. Sidewalks are fabulous. How is he going to do a sidewalk on an 18-foot street unless they take people's property by eminent domain, which they might like, but they also might like things to stay just the way they are. By the Fair Housing Act, you cannot, it is illegal to ask if there are children involved. And we don't want anything to say that we cannot have children, we don't want children, that's not what we're talking about, but don't tell us because it's a one-bedroom apartment, you don't assume there'll be any children, which means you're not going to allow a mother and a child to come in, or a father and his son come in. There's going to be children there, and that's fine. You've heard of cots and day beds and things like that, all right. But against the law, you cannot ask them. If this is passed, and I'm hoping that it's not, and to be honest with you, it doesn't affect me personally. I am here because I live on South Street, but I don't live on Brayley Lane or any of the streets that come out there. But this is supposed to be a low income, and you're making it look like an low income. The building is ugly. It looks like a barracks. It looks like it's part of a housing project. So if it passes, sir, I would like you to please talk to your architects or your designer, maybe do something with the front of it, because there is no way that there is any landscaping that's going to make this building look any better than what it looks like now. And to me, what you're doing is these people that are going in there, you're stigmatizing them to low-income people. So I'm hoping that it is not passed, sir. I'm sure there's plenty of other properties that you would not be impinging on the traffic
If
problem
you could
there
wrap
is
up,
now.
please.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Paul Morrison. I live in that area. I have worked in public safety for about 30 years, driving emergency vehicles. I have, for lack of a better term, could be considered to be kind of a public safety expert at this point. I drive that area every single day. The entrance and exit to Brayley Lane is extraordinarily narrow. Vehicles, regardless of which way they're making a turn, have to accelerate in order to do so and to avoid collisions. I have some concerns about, I personally believe that that intersection should be controlled by a traffic signal. I understand that traffic signals are not very fashionable. If you look 200 yards up the street, there are 2 traffic signals within 50 yards of one another. One at Aubrey Street and one to enter and exit Dunkin' Donuts / Mayflower Provisions. I think that when you consider the vehicle traffic coming out of Nook, especially to and from and during the entrance and the beginning and ending of school, we're talking about a number of unskilled, inexperienced drivers leaving the school, coming out of Nook, and having to, again, accelerate into a place where you don't have a lot of protections while you're making those turns. So again, regardless of which turn you're making, there's acceleration. I apologize because I wasn't able to identify the entrance and exit for the building itself. It appears to me that the natural entrance to this particular building that we're discussing would be down on the corner where Brayley and the proposed driveway would intersect. The driveway into where the parking area is appears on paper to be very narrow, and I anticipate that the Amazon drivers are not going to want to back out onto Brayley. So what's likely going to happen is they are going to accumulate on Brayley Lane as vehicles are now trying to exit South Street and accelerate, and what is already too narrow of a road is going to be obscured by delivery vehicles that are just going to park out there because they have to make a number of deliveries in a small amount of time. So, again, safety is my concern. I care very little about the socioeconomic status or proposed situation involving who is going to occupy this structure, but I have a great deal of safety and concern for the children in the area, regardless of which way they come in and out of that intersection, the children in the area who have to wait for buses in that area, and the number of vehicles that are going to enter and exit basically adjacent to the intersection of Brayley and South, which already has, in my opinion, entirely too much vehicle traffic as it is. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the room, preferably with something new to say?
Yes, my name is John Parker. I live on Brayley Lane. My biggest concern is the intersection. We really do need to have a stoplight there, a traffic light. Everybody tries to blow that away. You can put up signs and stickers and things on the street and say, now we're going to make it a lot safer. It is not. People come down that street from Mayflower Food and Spirits. They're doing 45, 50 miles an hour. You need a light at that intersection. That's all I can say. And plus, the fellow mentioned about putting sidewalks in. So he's going to put a sidewalk up to their driveway going in and make a little turn in for a bus. The street is way too narrow to do all that. And where's the sidewalk going? Just to that parking lot? That's not going to help the people on Brayley Lane at all, or the children walking up and down that street. That street is really narrow. I've lived up there 30 years, and the town has never, the only thing the town has ever done is they do plow, and they fill in the potholes, but they have never done anything to the street itself, and it is horrible. It's really bad, and it's dangerous, but my biggest concern is the intersection. It really needs to have a stoplight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room?
Hi, how you doing? Oh, I apologize. Back hurts. My name's Eric. I also live on Brayley Lane. I just really honestly think this is a horrible, horrible decision. And whoever thought up this scheme should actually lose their job because they're not too smart. It's very dangerous on that street. It's a really narrow street, and if they have a degree, it should be taken back because they don't deserve it. And I do apologize for speaking honestly. If I had $1 for every car part I picked up off my front lawn, or just miscellaneous crap from multiple car accidents, the gentleman's dictations of accidents is absolutely wrong. He got what he wanted to hear, and that's what he submitted to you. That is not the truth. It is not the truth. I actually had to put stones in my wife's front yard just so cars wouldn't drive through the front of the frickin' house. So whatever dynamics he's given you, it's a blatant lie. I don't know what Mr. Attorney pulled up or whatever, but honestly, it's a bunch of crap. I know my 3 minutes is up, but I wouldn't listen to him because it's a bunch of rubbish. It's all about money. That's what it is. Thank you, board, for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room?
Hello, Pam Ross. I live on Miltz Way, which is off of Brayley Lane. Just quickly, I'm not going to repeat what everyone has already said, and you guys understand the severity of what could possibly be happening down there. What I must reiterate is that the reason we're here, or the reason that they're here, is to ask for variances, correct? For certain things, in order to make this project go through. That's why they're here, correct?
Correct.
5, I believe? 4, 5? Okay. None of us are against affordable housing. And we also understand that because of the lack of affordable housing, 80% or something the town needs, that this is very appealing to this planning board and to the people of the town because, oh, it'll get our numbers up. No one here is against that. We're for that. But if you have to ask for 5 variances to put it in the spot, you're in the wrong spot. That fact and the fact what everyone here has said, like we said, we don't need studies of people who don't live there and base it off statistics that are not in the same area as this. Maybe the same size neighborhood, but not the same South Street. I'd like to see a replication of where that is somewhere else around here, where they got accurate statistics. Based on the fact that they have to get all these variances and the fact that everyone on the street, young lady, great job, by the way, well done. Our future looks bright, okay? But not if we're just going to let people build wherever they want just to make the numbers look better. 5 variances, I must tell you, that can't go through. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to ask anybody on Zoom.
So Scott, you have your hand up, you can go speak.
Hey, how you doing? Scott Navarro, Sweet Neighbors Way. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions. Meg Rako's attorney stood up there and said that they can't fix all the issues or problems there. Well, he can. Don't develop here. It's not a good spot to cram in those units. It's too dense. Not enough parking. We've heard that 1,000 times already. But I do have a couple questions. How long did someone physically observe the intersection in Braley Lane in person? Okay. The last meeting we were at, Meg Rako said the town was going to get a grant for the intersection work. It sounds like that's not happening anymore. Meg Rako is going to pay 100% of it. That's correct. And then also, you mentioned 2 parking variances. One was for the size. And what was the second parking variance? I missed it. If you could relay that information as well. That's all I have. You know, this is obviously not the right spot for it. It's too dense. And, you know, people have said there's plenty of other options. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else on Zoom? I'm not seeing anyone else.
Okay. Anyone who has not been heard yet? All right, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to close public comment.
Motion to close the public comment.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote. All in favor? Okay, at this time, public comment is closed. I think next we'll bring some of these questions back to Mr. Dirk and to Mr. Veo to address some of the things that can be specifically addressed. So one of the first questions that came up that was very clear from a traffic standpoint was, why not leave the entrance on South Street? Can you address that, please?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's a very good question. It's a very logical question as well. Standard practice from traffic safety and traffic management is that you do not locate driveways on the major street when you have an option to put it on the side street. And so that's why it's being done in this case. If you think of it, the perfect example is why we create frontage roads. We create frontage roads so as not to create driveways on the major street where we're moving the traffic and where everyone has said there's higher speed and higher volume traffic. What you want to do is introduce slower speed, lower volume traffic on the slower speed, lower volume street. So given the fact that we have an opportunity to have access management, the best approach is close the driveway on South Street and put the driveway on Braley Lane, where we have residential traffic entering a residential roadway which has residential volumes and residential travel speeds. So that is a common safety practice that's undertaken when you have the opportunities, such as this site being on the corner, to develop a driveway as proposed. So that's really the reason why it's good access management and safety practices to place the driveway on the road.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Other questions were asked, obviously, questions were asked about parking. So the two variances that are being sought are variances for the width of the parking spaces to remove them from 10 to 9 feet, which, as Mr. Veo explained last time, was done based upon the fact that residential spaces are 9, commercial spaces are typically 10. The other was to reduce the number of guest spaces from 5 to 0. Mr. Veo, you want to address that?
I can, and I'd like to just go through, I mean, I made, notes on several of the questions, so I'd like to go through and answer as many as possible. I'm going to try to refrain on answering some of the condescending and ridiculous questions, but I'll address some of those as well. So parking specifically and variances, we're not here.
I'm sorry, excuse me one second, Mr. Veo. For those in the room, please, we respected you when you spoke. Please, if I can hear you, it means you're speaking too loudly. We ask for decorum. No one inhibited you from speaking. I asked you from the beginning. Everyone gets the same courtesy. And no, I'm sorry. Public comment is closed, and you were given an opportunity to speak. That's how public comment works. So, yeah, let me get this to me. Mr. Vale, please proceed.
So again, we're not here seeking variances. The way the planning board works in this situation is that any applicant comes before the planning board to seek a special permit. The special permit are the rules in which you will follow to create a development in a particular zone. The variances that are asking for are very typical in just about any development in town. So specifically to parking, the variance on the width, literally every residential development in town, maybe barring a few, that variance to go from 10 down to 9 is a standard occurrence. There's nothing bizarre about that. There's nothing about that that is indicative of trying to jam this on this particular site. So that's just a completely false statement of someone who doesn't understand the way the planning board special permit process works. As far as the parking and the number of spaces. So there were a lot of anecdotal comments about it's not enough spaces, I know it's not enough spaces, this is what's going to happen. Again, those are all just anecdotal comments without having any data behind them. We either own or manage over 400 units in Plymouth. Many of them are one bedrooms. The rule of thumb, or bylaw, I should say, in town of 1.3 spaces per bedroom, and then an additional 5 if the zone is multifamily, is actual data that works. It wasn't created as a bylaw just on a wing and a prayer. It was created from statistical data, and that data is now backed up with, again, about 400 units across all of Plymouth, showing that when you provide 1.3 spaces for one-bedroom units with an additional 5 for guests, you do not have overflow parking. I can point to literally every one of our affordable units that are one bedrooms and say we have 0 overflow parking. So it's just not a true statement. As far as children, you're right, you cannot deny children, nor did I ever say that, and what I said was they're not expected. They're not expected because, again, we're looking at historical data across one-bedroom units, not across Massachusetts, across Plymouth. And again, we have a lot of data to look at. Out of all of the affordable units that we either own or manage in Plymouth, I do not believe we have a single one-bedroom unit that has a child in it. It's just not the norm. So you can say it's going to happen, but historically and by the data, it's not happening. As far as the discussion that was had with the director of the DPW on plans for the intersection. According to the DPW, there are no pending plans There has been no funding put in for next year's budget, and there have been no grants applied for this intersection. So when I say the work is not being done unless it's provided for by private funding or as part of this development, that's a correct statement. I'm not sure what your conversation was, and that there may be discussions. There's been discussions with the DPW and the administration in town for literally decades about this intersection, and nothing has been done because they have a lot of intersections in town to do. It's nothing against the DPW, it's just they have a lot to handle, and this is not part of next year's or the foreseeable future. Going to the traffic at this intersection. So as I'm hearing people get up, there was only a few people that actually lived on Brayley Lane. The other ones lived on developments off of Brayley Lane, which quite frankly is exactly why this intersection, on top of speed and development across town, those developments off of Brayley Lane is exactly why this intersection and Brayley Lane itself is overwhelmed, and that it should be wider. So all of those developments that were approved and people moved into over the course of the last 2 decades is exasperating that intersection. When this development, or if this development is approved and moves forward, the intersection will be safer at the end of this. So if all of the comments are true, and this isn't about affordable housing, and we'll get to that in a moment, if all of those statements are actually correct, and that's what you believe, is that you truly want safety for people at this intersection, this is the plan to do it. The mitigation measures that were gone over by the traffic engineer and the DPW are mitigation efforts that work, that are real. They're not anecdotal. They're not, I believe there are one accident a month, or I believe that people do this, or believe that people do that. This is based on real data, and they're facts. When we complete the improvements to this intersection, there will be fewer accidents and reduced speeds, which again, if it's what people want, then this is the solution. As far as the person who said, anyone can hire any traffic engineer and they'll give you whatever you want. Well, first of all, any traffic engineer you hire is reviewed by the DPW. And I do not believe the DPW or the town administration or any member of that organization making decisions is just making decisions because the developer wants them to. Secondly, if you hire a traffic engineer, it's a professional group with degrees, with licenses that are governed to perform to the best of their ability and by certain guidelines provide data. They're not just going out to the highest bidder and performing these functions. I did not have a single conversation with Vanessa or Mr. Dirk about what data should come back or how they should look at this intersection. They do their independent study, they bring back the data, and it goes to the DPW for review. They question items, and then it's modified, and then it goes to the planning board. So there's a few other things I could bring up, but I'm only going to comment on one other one and then sum this up. So the person that got up and said, "This just feels gross," honestly, I don't even know what to say to that. What feels gross is the fact that you're saying that this affordable housing development feels gross, and I would challenge you to go to any affordable housing complex we have in town. There's nothing gross about them. There's nothing gross about the people that are living there. They're people that can't afford to live in the single-family home that you have on Brayley Lane. And when you also question the fact that who's going to control them from not having 5 or 6 people living there, I'd ask the same question of you. Is who's going to control you from having 4 people living there down the road? The same rules apply to all of us. These people are just a little bit lower income. So the only thing that felt gross about that was your statement. So to sum everything up, we've addressed all the concerns with actual data that were brought up. The things that Mr. D'Ambroso addressed in the beginning, such as drainage and parking and some of those, I guess let's just call them other issues other than traffic, are non-issues. The only thing we're really focused on right now, or have been for the last 2 weeks, is traffic. The traffic study was done in a professional manner, reviewed by the DPW. The impacts from a 24-unit, one-bedroom apartment complex is minimal. It's as simple as that. There's no gray area to that data. The problem at that intersection is not going to be exacerbated in any way by this development. What's going to happen is the intersection is going to be improved. And that is clear by the data, it's clear by the DPW's comments, and I firmly believe that if the planning board stands behind the comments that I've heard for the last 12 years about wanting affordable housing, this is the perfect location for it. It fits the model extremely well, has limited impact in terms of traffic, and lets the local residents have their intersection improved at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Vale.
This one's not going to work.
All right, this is working. It's finally working again. All right. I'm going to bring this again back to the board. I'm going to start with Mr. Grandy.
Okay. Obviously, Braley Lane hasn't received the amount of service from the town that the residents there feel they should receive. But again, there's limited budgets to work on the roads in the entire town. Now, as far as this presentation, I would think that safety is paramount here as far as this intersection is concerned. And from the way I'm looking at this and looking at the report that was done by Vanessa, the average speed through that intersection is 21 miles per hour. That's what it shows in the report. And the legal speed on this particular road, I believe that is 30. Now, I'm going to ask some more questions, but I want that confirmed. The report says the speeds going through this intersection are 21 miles per hour. Is that correct?
It's correct for the Braley Lane approach to the intersection. So the measurements are done where the driveway is going to be located, so we can look at what the speed is approaching the driveway.
Okay, so now what is the speed on South Street?
So we didn't measure the speed of traffic on South Street because we're not locating a driveway there. The posted speed limit is 30, but I think as you heard, I wouldn't be surprised if the speeds are 10 miles an hour above that, based on what we're seeing for the crashes that are happening at that intersection.
So you're saying it's 31 miles per hour on South Street?
No, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit.
Over the speed limit? Right, so by making the corrections in this intersection, you're actually tightening the road width, slowing the speeds down as a traffic calming measure. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me see. When we talk about the lights here, we heard that you were going to have some flashing light that presents the speed. Is that going to be on South Street, or is that going to be on Braley Lane? Or both?
Jeff, can I answer that? So they're proposed on South Street, one both north and south of the intersection. We also were discussing an alternative with the DPW, and that is to, instead of putting the radar feedback, to put blinking crosswalk signs there. And we were leaving that up to the DPW to decide which they felt was the most advantageous and would improve the safety the most.
Well, that's something that is important to me as far as the safety is concerned in that intersection, is being able to cross these streets safely. And by making these improvements, this intersection has become safer. If you leave it currently the way it isn't going to get any safer because the town doesn't have any plans currently through the DPW or the funding that's in place to do any corrections in this particular intersection at this time. Doesn't mean they may not do it in the future, 5 years from now or more, depending on, obviously, the development. Now, as far as this housing is concerned, I consider it, myself, workforce housing. We're talking about single nurses, we're talking about firemen, we're talking about policemen, we're talking about people that are currently in the workforce that can't afford to buy a single-family home for $700,000 or $500,000. So we struggle with being able to come up with affordable housing. We have the state mandating the MBTA housing laws. We have affordable housing that we really need to be putting in place because we don't meet the thresholds, and we may never meet those thresholds. But these people may make a little bit less than we do, or we do currently, and can't afford to buy a new home. So they're looking for something affordable that they can move into. And this is part of that equation as far as the affordable housing is concerned. So, but again, the paramount issue for me is the safety of this intersection. And if by doing this work is going to improve this intersection, that's important to me. I would also ask that the 5 parking spaces be added to this plan, because I think the guest parking should be included in here. The width from not 10 to 9, I understand. Now, someone had mentioned there was 5 things. That's 2. Someone tell me what the other 3 are, please. So everybody knows what they are.
There were setback requests. There was
3.
There was the driveway closer to 55 feet,
That's 4.
and 1 is for affordable housing itself. So simply to have an affordable housing request requires that there be a separate approval by this board. So the affordable housing component is one of those in and of itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I don't want to take up any more time, because I'm sure the other members sitting here with us have questions also. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have more, but I will relent my time to the other members, please.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm finding myself a little bit confused here. So I've got two dirty words for you. Not the ones we heard earlier tonight, but 2 dirty words are 40B and NIMBY, not in my backyard. I understand it. I've faced development in my neighborhood too. 40B, what happens is, and what has happened to us here in Plymouth, is we've fought developers. We've had people sue the developers, hang them up in court for years, and their project doesn't happen. Guess what happened? A 40B development came in with bigger density, less restrictions on it, a much bigger project. So I think I might have to commend Mr. Vile for not even mentioning that as being the stick, whereas this is the this is sort of the carrot. Now, this is a dense project, but this is a multifamily district. Multifamily is allowed in this district. So really, the only waivers they're looking for are not insubstantial. Some setbacks, some parking spaces, the width of the parking spaces. None of those really speak to the density of the project, which I think is I get the feeling is maybe the neighborhood's concern. But really what I'm getting from what I heard from the professional traffic engineer, a man who does this and is very well respected in the field, that in the end, you and your family will be safer when this project goes in and the traffic improvements go in. So, you know, there's another saying of biting off your nose to spite your face. You might win the battle here, but lose the war. The engineering department's concerns, also professional engineers, have been addressed. The concerns of the neighborhood, I think, from your comments in the previous hearing, I think the engineers and Mr. Vile have really addressed a lot of what came up and what was expressed as problems with the project earlier. So I think that, well, at least the things that were brought up that could realistically be addressed. Okay? So I actually think that this is going to be an improvement in the long term. And I think that's enough said, but I feel that this this is a project that should go forward. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Before you begin, Mr. Donaldson, I just want to, because I know people, it's late, and for those of you who are good enough to stay rather than those who simply left in disgust after they were heard and didn't want to hear anyone else, assuming, as we've heard from Mr. Veo, that there is an option for either the speed recognition or a flashing crosswalk, by a show of hands, I'm going to ask those people who live there, and also those who are on Zoom, if they're willing to participate, just so we as a board have a sense again, you've heard, we want to make this area safer. So I want to ask the people who have to deal with this on a daily basis, what you feel. So by show of hands, who would prefer to see a flashing crosswalk sign? As opposed to a sign that records your speed.
Is this with this development going in or without it?
This would have to be with this development going in. We have this board has no control over what the town does with respect to existing traffic conditions. So what we're saying is, in the event that someone is willing to do this, a private developer is willing to pay for this, which would you prefer to see? So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Again. Okay, fine. Fine. Then we don't. Fine. Thank you very much. Okay, I forgive me for asking you for additional thoughts and comments. My mistake. Obviously, you. Thank you. All right. All right. Thank you. That's enough. Mr. Donaldson.
I'm reclaiming my time.
Thank you.
Everyone else had the time to speak, and now it's my time. So I understand in regards to the traffic. Traffic is an issue, and you all as citizens of that area, I did not hear. I heard the first session that some individual actually had a conversation with the police. I haven't heard anyone say they had any conversations with the select board or the other people who can possibly have some other input into regards to the speeding in that area. As members of the planning board, we cannot control people's speed on that road. I understand there's DPW issues. That is not in our wheelhouse. What is in front of us is a development for affordable housing. But what I did hear is the concern of them and those people that will be living there. You were allowed to speak, and based upon what you've heard and you were able to say and speak up here, I'm telling you, as one of those and them people, it was what I heard. This project before us is a project that is from some people's point of view, it may be too dense. And that's understandable, and that's something that we can address as a board. But I am a little upset and disgusted by the fact that
I don't know who it was, but someone basically called it projects just because it's affordable housing. That is not what we're supposed to be as Plymouth. And you can shake your head no. It was said. I ask you to go back and look at the tape. I heard it. I know what I heard. And I'm not going to banter back and forth with you, ma'am. You can have your opinion. And
We do not.
I didn't say you. Did I say you?
Carl, hold on. Carl, hold on. We don't engage in this back and forth. I'm sorry. If you want to engage in the back, and forth, you can do it in other forms. We have given you your time to speak. Now this is our time to deliberate. Again, we ask for you to extend the same courtesy to us that we extended to you. I'm not speaking to any one person. I'm speaking to the room in general. This is how proceedings work. If this were a court of law, you wouldn't be doing this. You'd have had the respect that we, as volunteers, giving of our time, trying to do the best that we can for the community, you would recognize that and not interrupt us when we try and do what we do. So please do not do it again. If you do, I'm just going to simply go into recess for the proceedings for a period of time to allow cooler heads to prevail. But we do not do back and forth. You've had your chance to speak. The board now has its chance. Thank you. My apologies, Mr. Donaldson.
So I understand there's a concern in regards to the school, the buses, and the traffic. I live in Manament. I have the same issues with the schools, the bus, and the traffic. Traffic is going to be an issue. But just because there's an issue, and I'm agreeing with my other counterpart, just because traffic could be an issue doesn't mean we're going to cut off our nose and spite our face. Bear with me a minute. I just want to look at my notes. So I understand it was mentioned that there may be events at the library and there's parking along the side of the road of the library, and that may not be an issue, but it sounds like everyone is concerned about the parking that may happen outside of the development. To me, in hearing that, I go back to it's not about what's about the development itself. It's about who's going to be there. I believe that we've heard from the traffic study. We've answered the questions in regards to whether or not we're coming out on South Street or the other street. All this is based upon the data that was given to us for us to make the decision that we will need to vote on. Again, it is not the board's the board is not. We can take into consideration the issues with traffic, but that is not our wheelhouse. And I'm sorry if I seem a little frustrated or upset, but I'm also disturbed by the issue that happened earlier in regards to the Zoom on what was said. So my apologies if I'm a little disturbed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. We do public comment to hear from the concerns of the residents. As I've said many times before, and I'll repeat it again, when considering any project, there are three competing factors that always apply to this board: the rights of the property owner, the impact on the immediate neighborhood, and the concerns of the community at large. This project is no different. The immediate property owner, or proposed property owner, wants to build something that will, in some degree, maximize the value of the property for the purpose that's being proposed. In this instance, 24, they're proposing very high density, 24 units of affordable housing. And again, and Mr. Veo is to be commended for doing some measure of actual affordable in that large component of 80% AMI, which I have repeatedly said is not affordable for Plymouth. We have the concerns immediately, of course, of the abutters, the people immediately here. And you've expressed your concerns quite appropriately. And my fellow board members have highlighted those. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. And then, of course, there's the concerns of the community at large. One of the concerns of the community at large is making sure we have a diversity of housing that can be afforded by different people so that we don't continue to price people out of our community. Though if we do not have people at all levels of income in our community, we don't have a community anymore. So this project presents some challenges with that. It absolutely does. I'll start with, again, we heard initially questions about drainage in Brayley Lane. Brayley Lane doesn't drain well. Well, this project by definition will improve drainage, because if there's any water coming off of the site existing right now, that will stop. That's just the nature of new construction. We require it. The DPW requires it. It has to happen. So that's no longer the issue. Parking. If this board does not opt to give the waiver for the 5 parking spaces, then what is being proposed is per our bylaws. So people say, I know there's going to be this many people. I know whether or not that is or isn't the case, our bylaws, our laws, your representatives have enacted, say 1.3 spaces per bedroom. So telling us to do something different, we actually don't have the authority to do. We just don't. So now we get to the crux of it, the issue, traffic, safety. Safety is unequivocally the most important point. I heard a lot of comment tonight, very legitimate comment, I'm sure, and I am in that intersection on a very regular basis myself, that there are problems in all directions. There are problems with people turning off of Nook. Obviously, there's way too much speed on South Street. And that there are issues with Brayley Lane and its width, and all of those conditions are our current existing conditions, problems that you have with the current existing conditions. And they should be addressed. But once again, the question was asked, who addresses those? Because honestly, and I hate to say it, it's not this board. We don't have the authority under any circumstances to direct the town to put a traffic light in. We don't have the authority to say, put sidewalks up and down Brayley Lane, which, as someone noted, by the way, would involve the eminent domain taking of a great deal of property up and down that street, or widening the road. We can't do that. We just don't have the authority. We do not. So what we have to look at is we are looking at the proposal that's presented in front of us. And when I look at that proposal, there are 2 competing issues. Issue number 1 is vehicles coming onto Brayley Lane, either coming from this proposed development or people visiting or delivering to this proposed development. I have a great deal of respect for Vanessa and Associates. The town uses them independently of any developer. They are professional licensed engineers. They know what they are doing. At the same time, I also know, as I look at the various factors, including looking at ICE Land Use 220, which was the basis for their determination as to the number of vehicles coming in and out, that there are a lot of other factors that ICE 220 reference, including, is this an urban or a suburban area? Is this, how many units are there? How many residents are there? What type of residents are there? So I know that there is definitely wiggle room in those numbers. And I acknowledge that depending on the circumstances, those numbers are probably low. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge, as Mr. Veo said, we have looked at development after development after development at the number of cars that an affordable housing project has, the number of parking spaces, the number of cars that come into that. It is not as many as market rate. That's why there is a lower parking number required. So whether it is 10 cars per hour for the peak, or even 20 cars per hour for the peak, it's not going to be more than that. There just aren't going to be that many. Over 1 hour, it's just not going to happen. So I respect the fact that a significant number of cars in one particular hour at one particular can absolutely cause a problem. No question about it. That is a very legitimate concern, especially at that corner where people are turning off. That's a tight turn, and that's a concern for me. But I balance that against what else happens at that corner. And what I am hearing, not just from the traffic engineer, but again, what you folks don't have in front of you that we do, is that the measures that were described were the ones that were identified by the DPW as the ones they want to see. So when someone says, well, how do we know there isn't something better? The only answer I can give you at this particular stage of the game is that the DPW reviews everything that goes forward through here. They give their comments. The DPW, and this is an unusual circumstance, we don't get comments from the DPW coming back saying, we want a developer to do traffic calming measures outside of their development. That does not happen on a regular basis. It happened in this instance. The developer said to the DPW, you tell us. And they came back with these measures. They were the ones, the DPW, so your town government, your officials, are the ones who said, these are the measures that we believe are appropriate to calm the traffic in this area. Not that they say put in a traffic light, which, by the way, is, most people don't understand the process that's involved with that. And that requires warrants and other issues and meeting certain traffic deadlines and requirements. If there were a warrant to do it, there'd be a discussion about that. The town hasn't done it. It is not for this developer to do it. The developer can't just simply say, okay, I'm going to go and put in a traffic light. The town has to approve that. Town didn't come back and say a traffic light is necessary here. They did come with these other things. And I can tell you that part of that is based upon the comments of the members of this board, after hearing you the first time, going back and saying, we want you to review this. So when someone walks out here and says, you're useless, allow me to disagree. Not only are we not useless, but in fact, to the extent that there are improvements being proposed, they are in part because the members of this board took your statement seriously and tried to do something. So to the extent my fellow board members and myself to some degree are a bit perturbed at some of the phraseology that's been directed at us and the lack of respect that has come from some members of the audience, understand we take it personally because we personally put our own efforts into trying to make this better. Whether we approve this or not, we have made our efforts to start with. And I, again, remind you that we look at the balances, and part of the balance that we've heard, among other things, is that our select board has voted in favor of this proposal. They want it to go forward from the macro view. The Community Preservation Committee, to which we have a member designated, voted to advance this to town meeting because they believe that there's value in the affordable housing component. So again, we as a board are trying to balance all of these things. We certainly respect very heavily that the members of the community immediately around this are the ones most affected, and do our best to try and minimize that impact if it goes forward. Hence my request, my apparently unmitigated gall in asking you, if something goes forward, what would be the best thing that you wanted? How dare I actually ask your opinion? But we're now left with that as a balance question. I will say point blank, I understand why the density is being requested as it is, and I am not particularly in favor of that level of density. So I'm balancing this, as my fellow board members did, as we all try and come up with the best answer that we can. And if it's an answer you like, and we say no, you're going to be facing it again. If it's an answer that we say yes, and you don't like it, I understand that, and that's absolutely your right. And it still goes to town meeting, and town meeting will still decide whether or not to fund it. And town meeting will make that decision. We don't make that decision. But before I bring this to the board for a vote, I wanted the audience to understand, and I want the public to understand what we go through each time as we try and do this. I say regularly that I encourage people to come. I am happiest when this room is filled. I am dismayed when we are here meeting and there's 1 or 2 people in the audience, nobody shows up on Zoom, and nobody cares. Because this is important. This is our community, and we are all members of that community. But at the same time, there has to be a balance created. And all of us up here are torn by this because we want to do the right thing. But the right thing always means somebody's unhappy. So I will leave it at that. As I have had, I believe, all of my questions answered. With that, I'm going to ask again the board members, any further questions of the applicant? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a motion.
Motion to approve, sorry, the number. B645131 South Street, Miracle Industries, multifamily affordable development.
Okay, at this point, we're gonna go through what the conditions are as to the motion.
Yes.
As to which we are
So,
going forward on.
so just
Mr.
two
Hartman.
things. So one is, there has been some discussion about the waiver of parking. So I think there's a motion, and you could do it either way, to do the waivers first and discuss those, or a motion to approve the special permit, and then which waivers you're gonna grant. So that's the first one. If I heard what I think I heard, we would add a condition. If the waiver of visitor parking is not acceptable, we would add that as a condition. But we'll deal with that based on your motion. We have 6 conditions that were identified in the town engineer's report to be addressed either at occupancy or prior to construction, so those will be added. And then from the discussion, I think the other condition would be that the off-site improvements shown on the plan shall be finalized and approved by the Department of Public Works. The final approval, with a final approval by this board at an informal meeting. The plan shall include but not be limited to the reduction in the intersection corner radius, shortening of the pedestrian crossings, implementing enhanced signage and pavement markings, installing installing permanent solar-powered radar feedback signs on South Street to notify drivers of the posted speed limit, sightline triangle improvements, and construction of a bus stop to be coordinated with the school department. I also heard comments that I would add to that in addition that the petitioner is willing to install either the permanent solar-powered radar feedback signs noted above or pedestrian actuated flashing crosswalks. The Department of Public Works shall identify the preferred mitigation option.
Okay. Mr. Chair. Mr. Donald.
Mr. Chair, also, is there a provision also in regards to the vegetation and the line of sight at the intersection?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we can eliminate the parking waiver and we would just include the 5 spaces.
So at this point, you're withdrawing your request for the waiver on the 5 parking spaces. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so you'll note that, Mr. Hardman. So at this point, my question, Mr. Donaldson, is your motion to approve the application subject to those conditions?
Subject to those conditions, yes.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? I will call for a vote. All in favor? And I am opposed. 3-1, it passes. No? It's a four, oh, sorry, is this a four, is a quantum of 4?
Yes.
I maintain my no vote. I'm voting no.
3-1.
3-1. It does not pass.
Okay.
That concludes the items on our agenda for this evening. Any new business? Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn then.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.